Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kayla Parr, and I am one of the Early Childhood Pyramid Model Implementation Facilitators for Nebraska MTSS, as well as a part of the Summit Planning Committee. We are very excited to have you joining us today for week 2 of the Nebraska MTSS Virtual Summit, focusing on engaging and strengthening partnerships. We recognize that you as educators are potentially experiencing some uncertainty and/or anxiety at this time, but we are thrilled that you have chosen to participate in this very important learning experience. Today, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Dr. Lauren Ivanovich to all of you and would like to take a moment to share some of her background information. Dr. Ivanovich is a research assistant professor at the University of South Florida in the Florida Center for Inclusive Communities on the Florida Positive Behavior Interventions and Support Grant. Dr. Ivanovich's research interests include multi-tiered systems of support with a focus on Tier 2 and Tier 3 academic and behavioral interventions for students with and at risk for emotional and behavioral disorders, reducing the use of exclusionary practices, and the integration of restorative practices within the MTSS framework. Dr. Ivanovich is certainly no stranger to Nebraska, and we are so fortunate to have her sharing her message with us today entitled Trauma-Informed Care and Restorative Practices. So without further ado, welcome Lauren.
Thank you so much, Kayla. Nice to see you all. I'm so happy to be here. Just give me 1 second. I'm going to share my screen and get the PowerPoint going for you. All right. So again, welcome. I know that there are tons of you that had just got let into the room. So I'm really happy to have you all here. And we're going to get started. We have about an hour, and this is going to be pretty interactive, at least I hope. So we're going to use that chat box frequently. So please be sure to have that pulled up and ready to respond. So before we get started, you're probably like, who is this person? If you haven't gotten to see me before, or we haven't had a chance to work together and talk. I am from the University of Connecticut originally, so a different Husky than some in your area. That's where I did my undergrad and master's. After that, I went to the University of Louisville for my PhD and am now a bull in South Florida in Tampa, and I work for the Florida PBIS project, like Kayla said. I recently got married. This is my husband, John, and we live in Tampa, and with our son, Ozzy. So if we have some dog lovers, shout out in the chat box for me as well. We would have cats except for John's allergic. So we are a dog family, but there's love to go around for all of them. So as much as I would love to be there with you in person, as I'm sure all of you would be as well, we are going to Zoom today. And so let's try to make it the best that we can and be interactive and take some really great stuff out of today. So that being said, we are going to try this community building circle in the chat pod. So this is a chat box style. I'm going to pull my chat box open so that I can see what we've got going on here. So take a minute, if you would, please. This is in place of me getting to see your face and hear your voice. Put in the chat box, what's your name? What's your role in your school district? And answer this question. If I had a superpower, it would be what? So I'm also going to ask that my panelists respond in the chat box for me because I think it's fun to get to know what everyone thinks that their superpower would be. I'll give you mine. So my name again is Lauren Ivanovich. I'm an assistant professor at the University of South Florida and technical assistance liaison to the Florida PBIS project. And if I had a superpower right now, it would be to be able to transport anywhere I want without having to go on an airplane or a car or any of that kind of stuff and just be there. So that would be what my superpower would be. I'm going to share a couple that come into the chat box so that we can start to get to know a little bit of who we have with us. So thank you, Kelly. My name is Kelly. She's a K-6 school counselor and upper elementary assistant principal. And her superpower would be to read people's minds. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. Linda, we've got lots coming in. Yay. Linda is a regional support PBIS, and her superpower would be to heal. Thank you, Linda. Heidi Farmer is MTSS coach in ESU 6. Her superpower would be to time travel. Heidi, I wonder who you would, or where, to what years you would time travel, or if there's a person or what that would look like. Christy is from Nebraska MTSS. Superpower would be super strength. So I don't know if it's Christy or Kayla, but oh, that's Christy. Okay, good. Whitley, school psychologist from Ralston Schools. Welcome. Robin, school counselor, would be to spot COVID. That's a great superpower for this day and time. Karen is a regional coach at NDE. Superpower, make the whole country compassionate to others and eliminate greed and corruption. Awesome superpower. I like Sarah's, staff developer ESU 3, being invisible. Let's see a couple more. We've got tons coming in. This is awesome. And if you can share all panelists and attendees, then everyone gets to see your responses, which is really great. Ellen is a SPED director. If I had a superpower, it'd be shop without having to go to the stores. Wait, you have Amazon. I think I might add to that, shop without a limit, right? Lori is teaching and learning specialist. It would be telepathy. Make my husband come around to my way of thinking. I like that. That would be pretty good. Another teleporting from Claudine. Veronica, it would be to slow down time. Tanya would be to teleport between meetings and locations. Michelle would be to fly. Awesome. We've got quite a few folks coming into this. So if you are able to read and share, remember to share both all panelists and attendees. You have to change that little blue to box when you submit your chat so that everyone can see them. So I'm trying to read you the ones that just came to me. My name is Tracy, first grade teacher, and internship for school counseling. Superpower would be staying awake all the time, so not having to sleep. That would be pretty cool. Oh, I like this. Beth, ESU 2 disaster response grant manager, to be a holograph. That would be cool. Telekinesis for Pandora. Clean my house from the couch. Also very good. Gain more time in the day. And the final one I'll read is Abby, elementary principal. Superpower would be to control the weather. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. If you keep putting in the chat box, that would be awesome. You can put all panelists and attendees so we can continue to see your responses. So thank you for doing that quick greeting. It's great to get to know who you are and start to build our Zoom community, even if we can't be there together in person. So I'm going to move on to the second part of our circle, and we're going to do a really quick feelings check-in. So in the chat pod, again, super easy, just real quick, you're going to put in a number 1, a number 2, or a number 3. A number 1 is if you're tired, you feel like you've been quarantining, social distancing forever. A 2 is that you're glad to be here, but you have a million other things to do with the opening of schools. And 3 is I'm super excited to be here. Can't wait to learn about effective statements and circles. Lots of people already sharing. Thank you all so much. Awesome. So I'm going to share, I like that some people are saying they're 1, 2, and 3. 1 and 2. This is great. So I would say I'm probably a 2.5 because, and I'll tell you why I'm a 2.5. I'm a 2.5 while you're all sharing because I'm super excited to be here, but it's been thundering here all day and my internet has been in and out. So I've been like this nervous wreck about whether or not my internet is going to work for our presentation today. So there are like other things on my mind too. If you would like to share why you're a 1, a 2, or a 3, we have lots of people who are 2s and 3s, a couple of folks who are 1s. If you'd like to share why you're a 1, 2, or 3, please go ahead and do that in the chat box as well. There's no pressure to share, but have the opportunity to do so if you would like. I'll give you a second to do that if you'd like to say anything about it. I'm glad to see so many of you responding and responding to everyone. This is great. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Tracy, for sharing. So much to do at the beginning of the school, and now with COVID guidelines, it's making it even harder. Absolutely. I just got to Zoom with a school in Nebraska last week, and that was a lot of their responses as well. Excited to learn. I'm new to the group, and I'm wanting to learn. Awesome. Thanks, Beth. So excited that you're here. Oh, thanks, Linda. I've seen you in person and you are amazing. Well, I appreciate that and I'm glad to be here. I hope that we can get the same experience online as we can in person. So it'll be a fun for all of us. Awesome. Thank you so much for those of you who shared in the chat box and who are probably furiously typing away as well right now. I'm going to move on to the third part, although I promise to read any responses you still put into the chat box. The third part of our circle is this activity, which today we're going to make it a response. So I want to know for you, what's the buzz around restorative practices, aka why did you decide to come today to this session? There's lots of other things you could be doing right now, and it is for you all 4:45. For me, I'm in Florida, it's 5:45. So what made you want to come to this session today? Or what's the buzz around restorative practices? And type some thoughts into the chat box for us. Oh, and Abby, thank you so much for sharing. She says, right now I have a playground cleanup going on, 2 open houses, lots of protocols. We open tomorrow and I'm a first-year principal. Very excited to be a part of the session and learn. Abby, you are gonna rock it. This is awesome. Christy, well, I want to learn more about it so I can share with my future teachers. Good. I love it when folks are honest. I often say during training, raise your hand if you were voluntold to come here today, because I want to know that you're here for real. So someone said indirect hours for my internship by being here. So listen, great. Get your indirect hours. Perfect. Move away from punitive practices. Someone who heard me in February when we were allowed to travel, which was super fun, wanted to remind myself of the process to share with teachers. Most schools want more information. I want to be able to help them. Hoping to learn more today. New to my role and wanting to learn about alignment, which is great. Trauma-informed practice in education is my research. Yay! And restorative practices could prevent re-traumatization of students. Absolutely, Jan. So feel free to share anything that you've learned in the chat box while we go along as well. I want to learn more about MTSS. I need to become more aware of restorative practices, continue to enhance my knowledge in order to support. I love how many of you are here to help support other people. What you didn't even know is that through that, you are building relationships, which is incredible. It's the baseline for restorative practices. And to promote inclusiveness and restoration. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. And I know more people are typing because there are so many great responses that I don't even know that I can read them all out loud to you all, but continue to grow in order to best support teachers. You're all so selfless in Nebraska, and it just shows me even more today, and I love it. So as you keep going, feel free to write in the rest of your chat. I know you're probably texting and writing it in there right now, depending on the device you're on. So make sure you send that chat in. I promise I'll read it. And I want to move on to the fourth part of our circle, which is our closing. And to do the closing today, we are going to actually review what we're going to do in the last part of our session together. So we're going to go over restorative practices, social emotional learning. We're going to talk about affective statements and classroom circles. And my hope today is that you will be able to define and the term restorative practices. What does that mean within your PBIS framework, and identify some of those common restorative practices to really hit on all of the things you all already talked about. So how can we support our teachers? How can we integrate this into our schools? How can we look at restorative practices through a trauma-informed approach as well? And how do we really best support our outcomes for our students? And that starts with building those relationships, and we're going to focus a lot on that today. So let's get started with another chat box. I told you all that this would be really interactive. So I would love to hear, what do you think is social emotional learning? What does it mean to you? You don't have to give me the standard book answer, because hint, hint, I'm going to give it to you next. But I want to know what it means to you. What does it mean to you in practice? What does it mean to you when you're supporting schools? What would it ultimately mean? And an answer very well might be, I don't know. Oh, look, we're already getting some great answers. Thank you. So we've got self-regulation skills, self-awareness and management. Oh, thanks, Tracy. Bees are great. I love that it's your classroom theme. Although I will tell you that I'm probably very afraid of bees in real life, but I think they're really cute in characters. More about SEL, self-regulation, management awareness, and ways to help students work through their emotions and feelings. Self-control and regulation as skills to navigate life, emotional regulation, lots of emotional regulation, whole child, key competencies that kids, I love this, and adults need to access. Treating students emotionally the same way we need, that's huge. We're going to talk a little bit about that too. It's really the changing of the adults as well. Helping students understand what they feel and how to work through it. Awareness of those emotions. Building a climate of trust, care, and relationships for students and adults. Absolutely. Taking care of emotional and social needs of your students and adults. Taking care of their needs beyond just what's in academics. And that is so important, especially today in the time that we are in, when we're about to start school, in the time of COVID, that we may have so many other needs outside of academics, that this is a great intervention to start layering in place of your, on top of your tiered approach. So we want to build this into your existing framework as well. All right, thank you all so much. So we're going to move in, and I told you, I promised that the next slide was going to be, what is SEL? So this is from CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. The CASEL website is on the bottom for you as well. I'm not going to read you directly this definition, but this is the definition of SEL that they give. You talked a lot about these things already: to understand and manage emotions, feel and show empathy for others, those positive relationships, both establishing and maintaining them, and you hit on making responsible decisions. So the other piece I want to talk about is helping students to set and achieve positive goals, and that is a whole process that they have to build, be taught, acquire, and acknowledge the knowledge, skills, and attitudes necessary to do those things. So we hope that they would, maybe through osmosis or from watching others, learn these things, but sometimes we have to explicitly teach SEL, or social emotional learning, in various ways across the board. So how do we do that? You'll see, again from CASEL, on this 5-bucket approach are all of those things that were in bold. So self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. That's the bulk. Those things built up, each may need to be explicitly taught. And they are taught through social emotional curriculum and instruction in places like your classroom. They're also embedded, and in order to be effective, need to be embedded in your school, in the school-wide practices and policies. So when we're thinking about what does our school policy look like, we have to think about it through a social emotional lens. And then also that would hopefully lead us out to our family and community partnerships, and in the communities and in our homes, especially now when we have our students who may be in some areas e-learning. So how are we making those connections to help with social awareness, relationship building over Zoom, self-awareness and self-management, and responsible decision-making in their homes? And I'm going to give you some walk-away tips and helpful tricks, I hope, to help with all of these areas as we go along today. So then, what is restorative practices? Again, this comes from the International Institute for Restorative Practices, or IIRP. They're kind of the overarching body of restorative practices, and this is their definition. I really like it because it talks about social discipline and social capital, as well as emotional well-being, which is how we are wrapping in social emotional learning, or SEL, in civic participation through how they learn and make decisions. So I hope that through these two definitions, you can see how they're really intertwined together. It's hard to just have SEL and not also restorative practices. And I would also to say it's really hard to have restorative practices without SEL. Those are the things that are taught, the practices taught, and really brought through their participatory learning in order to make sure that students know how to manage and regulate their emotions, how to take responsibility, and why be invested if you don't have relationships. So bringing all of those together is why we really talk about them as hand in hand and not one or against the other. So when we're thinking about restorative practices, a restorative approach aims to repair harm. It repairs harm to the relationship, the community, to the offender, the person who created their actions. But in order to repair harm, there has to be a relationship first. There has to be a buy-in or a part of the community first. So when we're thinking about this approach of repairing harm, we first have to make sure that there is a relationship and there are skills that have been taught and mastered to know how to build that relationship and know when things have been harmed. My favorite line of this probably whole slide deck is that people respond best when you do things with them, not to or for them. So when we someday get to be back together again, and I hope to get to meet you in person, and you get to come to a conversation about restorative practices, you get to see that we do this together and that we build this together to best fit into what you and your students and your school needs. We want to do restorative practices in our PBIS or our Tier 1 framework, not instead of or in place of, but in conjunction with, just like we build in our conjunction with social emotional learning, so that we are really impacting our entire student, our whole child, the relational, the community, not just of our classroom, but our school and our larger community as well. So I'm going to put up what those 5 guiding principles are of restorative practices. So when we think about restorative practices, and what you might be hearing me say is RP, I'm sure some of you might have heard of restorative justice before, or RD, restorative discipline. And there's a conscious choice that we've made to call it restorative practices when thinking about it being in school. So restorative justice, as you might think of, is really focused and honed in from the justice system. I was a teacher. I was a high school special education teacher. And if you told me to do restorative justice in my classroom for kids who are adjudicated youth, I would have said to you, no way, because they get that already in the places that I don't really want them to have to go. But if you're telling me to think about restorative practices as a set of practices and strategies and skills that I, as an educator, can use to help my students in a proactive and preventative manner, I would be all about that. So it's a really slight verbiage change to fit into what we do as educators in the classroom, as we do as administrators, and as we really do across the board as we support our schools and our districts. So all of that to say that when we're thinking about restorative practices, we think about these 5 R's: relationships, respect, responsibility, restoration, and reintegration. We're going to focus a lot today on relationships, building and teaching about respect, and responsibility. Restoration and reintegration happen more on those reactionary or responsive practices, but that also means that they have to have a relationship, respect, and understanding of responsibility in order to have something to restore and to be reintegrated to. So that is kind of the second half, and I'm going to focus on building those relationships for you at this point today. So what are our goals of restorative practices? There are quite a few, and I'm not going to read all of them to you. I'm going to highlight just a few. So the biggest one to me is this first one, that we have positive relationships that are shared by all stakeholders. When we think about those positive relationships shared by all stakeholders, that allows us to incorporate social emotional learning, or SEL, but also really focus on this trauma-informed lens. When we think about trauma-informed practices or trauma-informed care, when we're in the classroom, that really starts with predictability and relationships. So when we're thinking about restorative practices, we want to make sure that we're first thinking about how is our basis of a relationship. How is our classroom, how is our school, how are our policies, how are our district practices built on relational approaches and built on predictability that are positive and proactive to allow our students to build those relationships. And not just our students, but also our teachers and all of our community members. So any of those stakeholders that are a part of our strong community. And the other one that I want to highlight here for you is the third one down. When you are implementing restorative practices with fidelity, then you will be using a less reliance on exclusionary discipline practices. Restorative practices is incompatible with an approach that focuses only on punitive or exclusionary consequences. That doesn't mean that you cannot also have punitive and exclusionary consequences. It just means that that's not the end of the day for all of our students and our staff involved. Oftentimes we have instances that need to have exclusionary consequences. A student may have brought a weapon to school, for example. There needs to be some sort of consequence. And so if you are doing restorative practices, I'm not saying that you don't have to provide that consequence, but I am saying that then when the student is coming back, or if they're not, there still needs to be some sort of restorative approach, a conversation, a restorative chat, a meeting to help the student to understand that take responsibility, have that respect, and rebuild that relationship, those three big R's I just talked about, to their community. And whether it's another person, a school, or their larger community as well. So when we're thinking about restorative practices, we can't just only think about exclusionary consequences. There has to be another part to that as well. So there are categories of practices. We are focusing on the green, those proactive practices, because they are preventative and they are skill building. Just like we think about social emotional learning, we think about how we set up our classrooms, how we set up our virtual classrooms, how we set up our schools to be a trauma-informed approach, how we think about building our relationships and building that on prevention. Those are our proactive side. So affective statements, classroom circles, and potentially informal conferences. On the other side are our responsive or reactionary practices. Those are things that we would do when harm has occurred. So the whole proactive side is trying to build such a community that we actually mitigate some of those harm instances that will happen to begin with. Yes, there may be things that will happen, but hopefully through these proactive approaches of restorative practices, then you will actually lessen the instances of problematic behavior or instances of harm that happen. So I promised to talk about restorative practices in PBIS across your Tier 1 and really your Tier 2 and your Tier 3. So when we think about restorative practices, or in this case from this literature is RD, restorative discipline, it has the strongest impact when implemented as a whole school preventative approach. So that is really why we think about it as integrated into social emotional learning, integrated into your PBIS or MTSS structure. So I know in Nebraska, you all have a rockin' MTSS team, as evidenced by where we are on this MTSS summit. However, that's what I want you to start thinking about. So if you're supporting schools, or if you're an administrator, or if you're a teacher, a classroom teacher, or anywhere in the spectrum, think about what is your pre-existing framework of PBIS, of MTSS for behavior. How is this going to fall into to build up your tier 1? So universal for all students. Restorative questioning, affective statements, classroom check-in circles, and using a social emotional curriculum. One of the first questions I would ask myself are, do we have a social emotional curriculum? What is it? And is it being used with fidelity? And then moving up from there. As you move up on this list, you are moving up in time intensity and also needing more people to do these things. So anyone here should be able to leave today knowing how to implement effective statements and classroom circles. Go forth and do effective statements and classroom circles. I would not say that you should leave here today and go do peer mediation without further training, or facilitate family group conferencing without a lot more training, professional development, and knowledge around the issue. So it just takes more time. It also is for a smaller group of people. So as you move up the list, just like at tier 2, it's a smaller group of students, and at tier 3, it's a very even smaller group, because that is a really focused and narrowed approach. So we're going to continue today talking just about our universal, our tier 1, what can be used anywhere, and with all stakeholders, as those practices that you see in green. So what are those common types of restorative practices? The two that begin us, affective statements and circles, those are things like I statements. And circles can be things that you're already doing, like morning meetings. If you are pulling small groups to do social and emotional instruction, or if you're doing problem solving in class-wide issue. As you move forward into restorative conferencing or reintegration procedures, again, those are more popular, but they are also when harm has occurred. So let's get into some effective statements. In the chat box, I want you to try to answer some of these questions with me. So you can answer question 1 if you'd like. What do you need to teach empathy to students? And or question 2, how are you currently teaching empathy to students if you are? So what are you using? What are you doing? Why do you think you even need to teach empathy to students? All right, we got some folks coming in. Thank you. Modeling. Absolutely. Modeling empathy to other students or staff using book characters to discuss empathy. Modeling, teach multiple perspective taking. That's huge and really important. Social stories. Absolutely. Giving children real experiences and providing opportunities to practice real situations, not just teaching in isolation, but consistently. Oh, using programs like Second Step, great. Role plays, modeling songs, multiple age buddies, counseling of students. I have them think about their actions affected other students. Right, put yourself in someone else's shoes. Morning meeting activities, talking about different feelings through books and discussions. These are awesome. I'm so excited to hear how many of you are actually already currently teaching empathy in great ways. All right, I think we're getting a little slower in the chat box, but I'll give it another second before we move on, in case anyone wants to add another thought. So it sounds like you all see the value of teaching empathy. I would venture to say that sometimes we need to also teach empathy to other adults in our lives. It's great to teach it to students, but sometimes we may also need to think about how does our staff know about empathy? Are they empathetic? Or can we also do some of those strategies to our adults as well. So I'm going to give you a way to do that. A really nice way to teach empathy is to use affective statements. These are personal expressions of feelings in response to very specific positive or negative behaviors of others. These are what we might have talked about as I statements. This helps to change that dynamic between the individuals because it's changing the way we're saying our feelings, and we are helping to put other people into our shoes, or put someone else into our shoes. So for example, you may say, I feel frustrated when you don't address my questions during training. And to which I would say, I feel really frustrated that we are in Zoom and I can't hear your questions during training. So there are back and forth, right? But we use I statements. There are lots more listed for you as well with IIRP. I want to give you a really simple way to walk away with some effective statement usage. So you all already sound like you're pretty experts at this based on your responses to why to teach empathy, but I want to give you this 2-step format to do effective statements. The first part is referring to the behavior. So these are some sample sentence starters. I've seen these used really nicely in classrooms where teachers either post them or print them out and have them on a student's desk to help them to reframe their thinking. So instead of saying, stop yelling at me, I might say, when I'm shouted at, so you're still talking about the behavior that's harmful, but in a way that might be a little bit more effective to connect and teach that other person about empathy in the way you model your sentences and the way you model your feelings to those other people and to students. Negative is often the easy way, so I also want to encourage you to think about positive. So when I hear please and thank you, when I see you following the directions the first time, great things to start with, referring to the behavior at hand, both positive and negative, coupled with the second part of the statement, which is how does that behavior affect you? It makes me feel hurt because I like to be respected. I feel appreciated as a positive as well. I feel respected. So really nice sample sentence starters. And then here's it put together for you. So I feel blank when you blank because blank, as an example. Or I feel blank when blank because. You may not have to use these, and this is not the end-all be-all of an I statement format. It's just an example to get you started, or to even get some of those other folks in your life started who may not know this very well. I like to say that actually, I use this. My husband's like, are you PBISing me? And like, yes, I might be using an I statement on you. Are you RPing me is another one of his new favorites as he's starting to learn about more around what I do. One of my coworkers recently told me that after the training that I did with our staff, she actually stopped and used an I statement on a telemarketer. And it was really helpful. She said she was really angry that they were calling and not listening to her. And instead of hanging up on them directly, she actually changed and used an I statement, which was really well received. So it can be used in lots of different ways. All right. Normally, I would have you write some effective statements into the chat box today, but we have about 20 minutes left, so I'm going to move forward. But if you want to write any of these I statements down or take a quick screenshot, feel free to do so. I won't notice. And then if you want to practice, I'm happy to read and respond back to some of your I statements as well. We're going to move on to circles. So how do we do and what are classroom circles? As this one populates for you, circles really simply are just a structured process to bring people together. It helps us to understand one another, strengthen bonds, share and understand feelings, and solve problems. Listed on the bottom part are the various types of circles. So in green are those preventative and proactive ones that we're talking about. Community meetings, morning meetings, community building, peacemaking circles, for example. On the other side in blue are those reactionary or responsive practices of circles. If you're looking for more information around these types of circles or want a really good book study, I would recommend the book that's listed on the bottom, Kay Paranis' The Little Book of Circle Process. It's a really simple read. It's super educator friendly, and it's a really nice complement to figuring out how to put that into your MTSS process as well. So when you're thinking about circles, we have to have a circle, right? So what's the topography of a circle? In general times, we'll call them pre-March, we would say that you would be probably all sitting in a circle. You would have a talking piece, and you'd be in the same room together having a grand old conversation. Some things to consider during this time of social distancing and new precautions are that you probably, one, don't want to have a talking piece. You may have a air high five as you transition from one person to the next, or an elbow bump, or just a your turn, whatever's going to work in your classroom. Ask your students, ask your staff if you do this in a staff meeting. I would refrain from using the talking piece just because of passing the same piece of pen or a stuffed animal, for example, might not be great for this time. The other issue that we've come into some maybe problem solving around is this idea of being in a circle and sitting in a circle. So your circle might look like an amoeba. It might look like, if you're online, it might look like the Brady Bunch, where you're all in the Zoom and your boxes are back up and down and side to side. That's okay. It doesn't have to physically be a circle if we cannot make it a circle. Other options in your classroom or in your school, if you have space big enough or you have a smaller number of students, is to actually physically mark off, maybe in painter's tape or a different color on your floor, a circle. And students know that they need to be in one of those physical circles in order to be socially distanced. Oh, awesome. Jan just shared that she's seen that everyone has their own talking piece that they keep on the floor, and when it's their turn, they can do that, which is awesome for maybe adults or even for some of our older children. Absolutely. I love that idea. And that's definitely something that can be taught, right, about how to bring in and what it means. It's also a great sharing piece as part of your circle. But if you're able to have a circle in your classroom, maybe with tape, and you measure it out, that's a really nice way to do it. If you aren't able to move your students from the desks in which they need to be, that's okay too. You can have a standing circle. You don't have to have a sitting circle, or you can have your students sitting. What I'm trying to say is be as flexible as you can, and know that if you aren't actually in a circle, that it's okay. That during typical times, we encourage you to be in a circle so that everyone can see one another and that there is equal status. Oftentimes I go into classrooms, and especially early education, where circle time's happening, and all of our students are sitting on their square on the rug or in their circle on the rug, and the teacher is where? In their chair. So there is a distribution of power, right? So we're having someone sitting in their chair and others underneath. If you're an educator and you don't want to sit on the floor, don't sit on the floor, but then have all of your students bring their chairs as well to have a seating circle, or just stand up and have everyone standing as well. The idea here is that we want to convey that this is an equal status practice, and that we don't have a leader of the group, we have a designated facilitator. That facilitator can honestly and should be some of your students as time goes on. I'm going to give you the 4 parts again of that circle to help with that predictability when we're thinking about trauma-informed care and trauma-informed practices, but these are also really nice to have as well. So we have those expectations. Your circle may have new expectations that are linked to your school-wide expectations. So if we have be safe, be kind, be responsible, we can tie them to how we're expecting our students to be in our circles. Following a structure, understanding that we're speaking with respect and we're honest. That's a really nice way to have your students and your faculty be connected and create your own rules and expectations aligned to your school-wide as well. Finally, everyone has the opportunity to participate, but it is not mandatory. So participation is encouraged, but it's always optional. You may find that you'll have some students who love to participate. A couple of times I had, what do I do if I have someone who over participates? Really nice way to do that is to say, in one word, we're going to say our response. Or say, it sounds like you have a lot you want to tell me about that. Let's take a break on that, and you can and I can talk after. To kind of create that space to allow participation, but not over participation, because that may also become under participation for others. So that's your brief overview of topography of a circle. Now I told you there are 4 components of your circle. There's a greeting and focusing moment. Today I had you do that in the Zoom chat box. There's a connection or feelings check-in. That's our second part. A third is the activity, and a fourth is the closing. So we're going to go into each of these. If you would, for me, we've already did a greeting, so we're going to do a brief focusing moment. I want you to close, we're all going to close our eyes. I'm even going to close my eyes. Let's all close our eyes together. And I'm going to lead us through just a couple of seconds of breathing. So let's take a deep breath in, hold, and take a deep breath out. Let's do that again. Deep breath in, hold, and out. As you continue to do your deep breathing, I want you to visualize your happy place. On your next deep breath in, and when you exhale, let's open our eyes and come back together. All right, will anyone want to share in their chat bod where you went on your happy place? So for me, when I took that deep breath, usually I go to Target. And in this time of Target, I would be without anybody else there, and I would have my own iced coffee, and I would be able to just be around without a mask on and be able to walk around because no one else was in Target. That would be my ideal happy place. My other place would be the beach, and I love that so many other folks are also in the beach facing a sunset, relaxing at home, family cabin, mountains, lakes, a stream in the mountains, riding one of their horses, Dillon Reservoir, the mountains. Oh, I love all of your happy places. This is great. So I hope that through that very brief exercise, you were able to recenter, and visualizing your happy place brought you a smile home with your kittens to the place that you really enjoy and want to be. A greeting happens first. They help us to set our positive tone. It allows us to have everyone be included in our circle. When we do a specific greeting, that's something that has our name attached to it. It's really important when you're first starting circles to do a greeting that includes saying the student's name or the teacher's name or the person's name. My full name, and I hope you all, have some sort of fun reaction to this, is Lauren Ivanovich Katsakopoulos. So do you think that maybe sometimes my last names get mispronounced? They do. However, the name that gets most pronounced the most is actually my first name. So my first name is Lauren, Lauren. Most folks may pronounce that as Lauren, but my mom said, I named you Lauren, Lauren. If I wanted you to be called Lauren, I would have spelled it Loren. Now, do I honestly really care about that? I'm a child of the 80s. Like 5 of my friends are also named Lauren. So, and we all say it a different way. It doesn't really bother me, but I say that as an example for you to know that you would probably be intimidated by reading one of my last names on a screen. but you probably phonetically would get them correct before you may get my first name. So how is that true for all of your students? There are many different ways to say names that we might think we're saying correctly all the time. So having the own person get to say their name is really powerful. The other way to do that is a focusing moment, which we just did. A focusing moment allows us to bring us back. It might be part of the chaotic. If you're doing a morning meeting and your students are just coming in, they're just getting settled in the classroom, and they know each other, a focusing moment might be a really nice activity to do that. And there are some examples listed for you. So that's the first part. It's really pretty quick. There are some fun examples of virtual greetings during social distancing. I actually saw this from it's called Family Bold, and thought it was really super cute. So some different ways to non-touch each other, but do a social distance greeting, to do an air fist bump, heart fingers, a silly face, those kinds, a pinky wave. I thought that was cute. All the various ways that we can be connected during our times of social distancing as well. The second part is the connection or feelings check-in. Again, this is another really quick thing. I had you just type 1, 2, or 3 in the chat box, but it helps me to understand where our folks are today. If we were planning to do a really intense activity and everyone felt really like a 1, I may have to rethink why we were going to do that intense activity. And maybe we need to do a problem solving circle or just some other fun, uplifting type of activity to get us ready for that next circle activity. So that's just super quick. The third part is the larger part of our circle. It's the activity part. This is the bulk of your circle, and it can have many different purposes. So we can do things like discuss a classroom issue, teach social emotional skills, and also to review our school-wide expectations. We are doing those things already. Why not do them in the set of a circle? So have the students get to talk about their names, their favorite superpower, for example, and then do a quick check-in. How's everyone feeling? And then we go through what our expectations are, or one of the day. How do we review what being respectful looks like in the classroom? Give some modeling, do some examples and non-examples, just like you would in general, but instead doing it as a circle activity. Here are some real life examples of circles at schools. So the first, starting with some teaching, doing things like teaching staff when they are inconsistent with performing hallway duty. Not that staff are ever inconsistent with hallway duty or attendance, guilty as charged. And so in a staff meeting, we might go through the importance of and how to do hallway duty, for example. Community building circles are in the middle. Establishing circle norms and agreements. This one did practicing listening skills with 2 round circle questions and modeling what it looks like and sounds like. So again, that idea of modeling, setting those examples up. And then finally, problem solving, and I like the one about gum, and on gum chewing in the classroom. And then the fourth part of our circle is closing. So we use a signal that indicates the circle is closing. It might be something that you decide on as a group. So do you have a chant as a school that you're already doing, that you're Cougar Strong, for example, and that's maybe how you all end the circle, everyone does it together. Perhaps you do one of those other social distancing greetings, air high fives to the person around you. You could do a 1-word reflection. What went well? What did they learn? What's something they're taking away from that activity? Or you could do your daily news, review the schedule of the day. That's what we did. Something simple to get us ready and going and transitioning on to the next piece. Regardless of the closing, it should be really quick. When I was teaching, my high school students decided they wanted me to do something ridiculous and silly, so I literally did an actual round of applause. And they always knew that that meant our circle was closing. They would join in on their round of applause, and we'd laugh about it, and we would move on. It's just a really nice way to set that predictability again. So when we use our circles to teach our necessary skills, we do these in addition to our existing teaching methods. It's just another tool in your toolbox. It does not mean that we have to throw away everything we've learned to do this. This is if it's helpful to you. It's if we have existing lesson plans that do not address our social emotional learning, or we don't have a structure to do that. It's a way that offers us that beyond what we typically have used. So there are these really 4 important parts of a classroom circle: that greeting and focusing moment, the connections and feelings check-in, activity, and closing. And again, these are really important, not just for our predictability, but also so that when we have set those relational pieces in stone of our classroom, we've set our community, we're building our community, and then if harm happens, we use these same 4 parts of a circle. So there is still predictability. If a student is, they've caused some harm in the classroom and we're going to do a restorative circle to bring some restoration together, we still use these 4 parts. The activity is building that community back together, problem solving through the issues that occurred. So these are allowing our students to know and our staff to know that whenever we are circling up, there's always these 4 parts. They always can participate, but they don't have to. And they always have those pieces of engagement that you have gone through and created as part of your school and your community. So those are really important when we're thinking about that integration piece. I'd highly encourage you to think about what are your school-wide expectations and how do they fit within your classroom circles as well and your structure for it. So you might be saying to yourself, okay, this sounds great, but what does it actually look like? There are some sample circle videos for you. So there are some elementary examples, there early elementary in kindergarten and then some 5th grade. And then there are some secondary examples as well. So actual classroom circles happening, and some are done being led by students in the high school examples, and really nicely facilitated as well for you. So what is the buzz? How are you going to implement effective statements and community building circles in your school? Let me know. What are you thinking with our last couple of minutes after hearing today's presentation? Great, thank you. Using I statements, a simple, easy way to take away from today. Awesome. What else? More I statements. So maybe we've already started using I statements and we want to continue our use. That's great. Referring to the behavior without saying you. Yeah. So as you notice, perhaps in my 2 statements I gave you, one had the word you and one didn't. And that's purposeful because if we're starting to just reframe the way we say things, you may have to be in there. But we want to ultimately work that you out. Great. Yes, I've heard of the Alexis Wiggins spider approach in social studies. Yeah, it's very similar. Teach and use I statements. I plan to use circles for guidance lessons. Awesome. I already circled with students. I like some ideas for not passing the talking piece. Great. Starting with our greetings. Absolutely. Those are great pieces. So as you continue to give me some thoughts around what you're going to take away from today, I want to give you some more resources. So there are tons of resources out there for you. The one I like to highlight is the San Francisco Unified School District. It is an entire practice guide around what they do district-wide. However, I would say try to remember to just read it on your computer instead of downloading it, because it literally is it's like over a couple hundred pages. So that's always fun when you start printing something and realize it's super, super big. So just a little piece of warning for you there. I also, like I said, this is a project that I work for, and I wanted to give you some direct links to things that we have done to help maybe some of your families and some of your of those who have already started to do circles around how they can do that in your families with teens and tweens. So there are these 2 virtual YouTube links as well, but I want to give you more. So a direct link, there's a tiny URL, which is nice. You don't have to get like the super long one. PBIS for Families. It's a 5-part series on how to integrate and how to set up your classroom, how to set up your home e-learning areas. So if they want to look at structure, positive feedback, expectations and rules, engagement, or responding calmly to inappropriate behaviors, those are really nice things. They can pick which ones they want to listen to in order. And then they also, the virtual PBIS is those 5 things, but for educators. So how might you adapt your classroom to a virtual approach as well using PBIS? And then I just want to say quickly thank you to you all. I love this. I saw this recently and thought it was just perfect for where we are. I love a good Dr. Seuss. I'll teach you in a room. I'll teach you now on Zoom. That just seemed very appropriate for us today. So I want to wish you, and this is my air high five back to all of you. This is not my dog, although it would be really cool if I could get him to do that. But this is my information. And I see that there is a request for a PowerPoint. So I certainly am happy to do that.
Lauren,
yes.
The PowerPoint will be uploaded to the Nebraska MTSS website along with today's recording. So
look at that.
That will be available in the next few days.
Awesome. So that's all I have. Thank you all so very much for being here, and I really appreciate it. I'm going to pass it back over to you. I'll stop share.
All right. Well, Lauren, we have to say thank you to you for being here with us today and being willing to share your knowledge. We've learned lots. There was more learning about the use of proactive restorative practices, how they build that foundation of positive relationships, as well as they help foster that sense of community within our own PBIS or MTSS frameworks. So what you've shared with us today will be beneficial for all school leaders and educators across our state, as you leave us with many practical strategies and next steps for teaching empathy through those affective statements and creating community circles within our classrooms. So all of these effective strategies apply within the systems that already exist within our environments. And so we thank you for sharing those with us. We do want to open it up for questions within the chat. So if you have a question for Lauren or the Nebraska MTSS team, go ahead and add those to the chat, and we'll finish up our session for the day. I know many of you could potentially still be typing, but right now, just seeing a lot of positive feedback for you, Lauren. So
thank you all so much. Very kind.
Yes, great presentation. I also, just for the rest of you participating, want to thank you for joining us today and look forward to having you participate over the next 4 weeks with us. We will be back on Thursday of this week at 4:30 with Sarah Kupsek and Amanda Whitty discussing family, school, and community partnerships. Thanks, everyone.